Good morning to all of you watching this at home. Good morning to the journalists that are watching and to all of our activists and supporters around the country. Welcome to this morning's press conference, which has been called specifically to deal with the issues that have arisen in KwaZulu-Natal as a result of the looting that broke out several weeks ago and the consequences thereof. We are on the ground here in KwaZulu-Natal, and I'm coming to you live from Phoenix, which has been the epicenter of some of the more violent scenes of looting and of criminal behavior, but which has also become the center point of a great deal of scapegoating and red herrings by national government, and in particular the Premier of KwaZulu-Natal, and in particular the Minister of Police, Cele, who seem to have a very unhealthy focus on Phoenix to the exclusion of the rest of the country and the rest of the province where violence took place. So the DA today, in this province, will be launching a program to unite, rebuild and protect the communities throughout the province that were shattered by the violence and the looting that broke out as the ANC's internal factional war spread onto the streets of South Africa, causing huge devastation, loss of life, and damage to property. 3 weeks after the event, and being back here in Phoenix, having been here during the tumultuous week of the violence and the looting, it's still incredibly hard to come to terms with the sheer scale of the devastation and plunder, and it is absolutely critical that justice is done and seen to be done for the looters and the instigators, but also for those who failed in their constitutional duty to protect citizens. There has to be consequences for the damages, the loss of life and livelihoods, and we cannot allow those responsible to simply walk away from the events of the last few weeks as if something never happened. And this is going to require a considered, a transparent and thorough analysis, and not just a superficial cover-up and rearguard action as we're seeing being attempted this morning by the Premier of KwaZulu-Natal and the National Police Minister, Cele, who are having a press conference about Phoenix, but not in Phoenix. They are having a press conference about violence and unrest in Phoenix, not at the Phoenix police station, but at the Inanda police station. And I think that it is very important that before politicians shoot their mouths off about the events of this, what happened here in KwaZulu-Natal, before they make unfounded allegations, that they come into communities where the problems existed and they speak and engage with residents. And that's certainly what myself and our DA team here in KwaZulu-Natal have been doing over the course of the last few weeks, from the initial violent period where we were able to walk around in the community, go and see for ourselves what was happening, to the aftermath, and now to what we're seeing as a pivot by those responsible to racial scapegoating, to trying to throw out red herrings, to try and distract from the very obvious failings of what happened. So what this province does not need, and absolutely what it cannot afford now, is the kind of crass race baiting and scapegoating that we've seen from parts of the EFF and the ANC, where they are attempting to pit one race group against another, and are only in that going to fan the flames of unrest and unleash even more suffering, even more division, even more damage to the province of KwaZulu-Natal. Now is not a time to be dividing people, using the mindless menace of violence to do so. Now is a time for us to be uniting the people of KwaZulu-Natal to rebuild, to grow, and to come together to address the devastation of families, of businesses, and of investor confidence in a province of KwaZulu-Natal and the country at large. And so it has not helped when race tensions are being whipped up by politicians. We've already seen some of the real blatant anti-Indian bias that has started to set in. People calling on the Durban City Hall steps for one bullet, one Indian. The EFF announcing their intention to have a march against what they term racist Indians. Now, it is completely irresponsible to paint a particular community with a single brush. And I think that having been on the ground and seen for myself, it is very obvious that yes, there were vigilantes in Phoenix, but not every resident in Phoenix is a vigilante. Yes, there were looters from Inanda, but not every resident of Inanda was a looter. And what we need to be doing as responsible politicians is bringing South Africans together, not pitting them against each other. And I want to put a warning out to those politicians who are irresponsibly choosing to ride the tiger of race baiting and generalization and stereotyping, that if they unleash that whirlwind, they will soon realize it is a whirlwind they will never be able to be prepared to deal with the consequences of. And if we allow those politicians to divide South Africans on that basis, that we're not going to rebuild, we're not going to get the jobs back that have been lost, we're not going to be able to fix what has been broken, and more importantly, we're going to allow those who we should be holding accountable and responsible for the violence, for the looting, and for the lack of preparedness, they're going to allow those people off the hook because they're going to sneak away under the cover of the subterfuge of what they're terming a race war. So citizens need to ensure that they come together, do not allow politicians to divide our communities. Because what I've seen on the ground and what we've seen in our interactions over the course of the last few weeks is that across the affected communities, the desire to build is far, far greater than the desire to destroy. But in order to be effective, builders in these communities need to now find each other. And so each of our DA councillors throughout the province will be calling meetings with stakeholders in their wards to discuss all issues relating to the service delivery and safety in an effort to better protect these communities. We will use these opportunities to bring people together around dialogue. What we don't need is more violence. What we don't need is more division. We need South Africans to come together now to help rebuild. And that will be the focus of the DA, bringing communities together. And I was very privileged over the course of the last few days to interact with families who've lost loved ones on both sides of the looting fraternity and also on the communities themselves that were under siege. I've witnessed the tragedy that happened through drive-by shootings that took place in Phoenix. I've consoled a widow of somebody who lost their lives unnecessarily through irresponsible fire of ammunition and bullets in an uncontrolled way. These are innocent people who have fallen victim to violence, who have had the futility of that violence best exposed to them. And that is what we need to avoid. So our meetings are going to bring together traditional leaders, religious leaders, neighborhood watchers, ratepayers associations, and community police forums, and other significant voices of leadership within communities. And on the agenda will be service delivery steps that must be taken to improve safety of communities, as well as discussions around ways to strengthen social cohesion here in KwaZulu-Natal and to stamp out this poisonous narrative of race baiting, stereotyping, and scapegoating. As with all other big challenges in South Africa, the rebuilding and reuniting of KwaZulu-Natal will require a whole-of-society approach. And in the vacuum left by the missing ANC government, the DA is going to do whatever it can do to rally our communities and society around this crucial cause. I do want to say that a little bit earlier today, Police Minister Bheki Cele and the Premier of KwaZulu-Natal, Sihle Zikalala, have had a press conference. Firstly, I think it is quite disingenuous of the Police Minister to be finding 101 other reasons to avoid asking himself the tough questions that we as society, the media, and citizens should be asking of him. Where was the SAPS? Why were they, as the President said, unprepared to face this crisis? Why was there a shortage of ammunition? Why was the police so slow to respond? Because it is in the creation of that vacuum where there was no law and order in South Africa that communities had to step. And into that vacuum stepped violence, lawlessness, looting, and elements of vigilantism. And so the ultimate responsibility lies, I believe, with the police minister and the security cluster for creating that vacuum that got filled by what we saw here in KwaZulu-Natal over those weeks. Why is the minister now on a crusade to disarm law-abiding citizens in places of Phoenix? All the while, the fact that military grenades were discovered in some of the places of the unrest and looting, military-grade ammunition was used against civilians and, in some instances, law enforcement agencies, automatic weapons that were used in the looting. Where is the search for those? Where is the search and where is the arrest of the so-called 12 instigators, the big fish that we keep being told were behind the organization of this violence and this looting and this unrest? Why have those arrests not been made? Why is the police minister focusing on the small fry when he should be going after the big fry? Why is there not a commensurate commitment to clearing up and clearing out a police service that sees private firearms that have been confiscated back on the streets of South Africa? So what we must not do is allow Mr. Minister Cele and these other fellow travelers in the security cluster to bait and switch the media's attention, the public's attention, and citizens' attention away from the various acts of omission and commission by the security services. If there is one thing that the entire political spectrum, from the radical far left to the far right, agree on, it's that the state exists primarily to defend the lives of citizens. When the state fails in that fundamental and basic duty, I believe we have the right to ask the questions about why that vacuum was created. And I think we are right to be able to hold those accountable, responsible for those acts of omission and commission. And so instead of looking to weasel his way out of accountability and responsibility, I believe that both the Premier of this province and the Police Minister should be, in the first instance, saying mea culpa, admitting to their own failings of their departments, of their personnel, and of their ministries, to be able to prepare South Africa for what was coming. And you didn't need to be a rocket scientist or an intelligence specialist to see on social media what was coming down the track, and yet the unpreparedness was evident wherever people went. The majority of citizens in this province are peace-loving citizens who are committed to only improving their lives and to living a life of value. That is the majority sentiment that I've picked up on the ground here in my travels around KwaZulu-Natal across a variety of communities. It is the state's role to make sure that people are kept safe and are able to live a life of value. When the state fails in that fundamental duty and create vacuums that are filled with lawlessness, violence, and the mindless menace of violence, that is when things fall apart. And so we will be holding the state accountable. We'll make sure that the ministers responsible are held accountable in the correct forum. We're calling for a full and proper parliamentary inquiry in the National Assembly, independent, thorough, and transparent, to be able to make sure that we are able to bring that element of accountability. And we will be making sure that we blow the whistle on the scapegoating, the race baiting, and the bait and switch that is currently being attempted by those individuals and those political parties to distract attention from the real problems. But also, most importantly, we're going to continue to fight for the reforms that are needed to be able to address the underlying causes of the fuel that was created by the spark of political instability and infighting in the ANC that found fertile tinder in poverty, unemployment, deprivation, that 2 decades of failed policies of this government have wrought on South Africa. A 42% unemployment rate, the world's highest youth unemployment rate, 30 million South Africans trapped in poverty and locked out of opportunity. Those are the underlying fuel that the looters and the instigators were able to take and use to their advantage. And so we will continue to pressurize government to bring that reform agenda to Parliament. And let me be clear, we said to the President right from the very beginning of my term as the leader of this party that we stand ready to be a partner at the rational center of South African politics to get that reform agenda passed. Because if we don't, the current trajectory of poverty, inequality, and deprivation and exclusion is going to continue. That is what we will be doing as the official opposition in this country. And we call on all South Africans now to be calm, to be rational, to reach out across the divide and find each other as South Africans so that we can reunite, we can rebuild, and we can grow, not only here in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, but across the rest of the country. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Francois Rogers, the provincial leader here, to talk a little bit about the provincial perspectives of what has been happening here in KwaZulu-Natal. Over to you, Francois.
Thank you very much, John, and good morning, colleagues. Just a couple of things that I'd like to add on to what John raised now. And one of those is the fact that we must never forget that we're here today and we're in this situation because of a government failure. There's no other reason other than the failure of government, and as John alluded to, this entire episode is part of a factional battle within the African National Congress that's spilling out into the streets of KwaZulu-Natal and into Gauteng. So unless we can establish the nucleus of the cause of this problem, I'm afraid you're going to continue to see this government just addressing the symptoms and not the cause. And you can clearly see that in today's presser, there was a very valid question asked to the Minister of Police, Bheki Cele. What is the police doing about the social media propaganda and incitement of racism and violence that's being propagated? Well, to say the least, the minister's response was absolutely pathetic, and he could give absolutely no direction as to how SAPS are dealing with it. Now, the people in the province at the moment, particularly in areas like Phoenix, people are feeling extremely vulnerable. And when you have these trolls on social media and these instigators that are propagating violence and racial division, and the Minister of Police can't give a direct answer as to how he's dealing with it, again we come back to a failed state, to a failed minister, and to a failed government. And that's where we need to stand up. We've seen, history has shown us the power of social media, the power of social media to propagate violence and racism, and it needs to be dealt with. It cannot be ignored. And if you just look at Jackie Shando, for example, that uttered the racist comments on the steps of the City Hall, where he called for white people and for Indians to be killed. It took the police 5 days to arrest him. 5 days. This is a man who's inciting violence in the eye of the storm. And you have to ask yourself, why does it take 5 days to bring an individual like that to justice? Finally, colleagues, what I'd like to suggest is that I'll be calling in the legislature, I'll be calling on the Premier that we put together a multi-party task team to investigate SAPS's involvement in the province and in Phoenix. I don't believe Phoenix should be the main focus of this type of investigation. I don't believe that the looting and the killing only took place in Phoenix. When I went throughout the province, from corner to corner, the looting and the killing and the inability of SAPS to control the situation was absolutely apparent. And I think that's an exercise that we as the DA will start undertaking to get to the root cause and SAPS's failure. My appeal to the KZN residents at this stage is we showed it very clearly during the 5 days of anarchy that we stood up, all people from all walks of life, all religions, all colors. Where the government failed us, we put up our hands and we said we'll protect our properties and we'll protect our lives. And that to me is the only positive aspect I can take out of the 5 days of anarchy. Therefore, I believe in our diversity, If we unify in the face of adversity, we will overcome the failures of government. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Francois. Right, any questions that anyone may have?
Got a question. There were reports that certain community members in Phoenix that are legal gun owners, that their guns have been confiscated. Got any feedback on that, or what are the implications of that?
Yes, we have heard alarming reports that the police are on an active mission to disarm private law-abiding citizens in Phoenix. We are getting the details of that, and we want to find out from SAPS what basis and law are you using to disarm private citizens. If you're not charging somebody, if you're not accusing them of a crime, you've got no right to disarm a private citizen, because there's now a political imperative to look like you're doing something in the face of the fact that you did nothing for so very long. And so we will be certainly making absolutely sure that we follow up those cases. I've asked the constituency head for the area, Hanif Hussein, to get those individual cases. And if the police have acted in a way and have confiscated firearms unlawfully, then we will not hesitate to launch a complaint to IPID, as well as other police oversight initiatives, to be able to make sure that they are brought to justice. As I said, the focus is incorrect. The focus should be on recouping the stolen ammunition. The focus should be on bringing into the police stations the military-grade hardware that was being used to blow up ATMs, to blow up stores, and to cause damage and mayhem. The focus should be on illegal firearms. Disarming private law-abiding citizens in a time of violence and unrest in the way that you've seen, I think is thoroughly irresponsible, and I think is a misdirection. I think what you have here is a minister who's failed to keep the citizens safe, a police service that was found wanting, who are now looking for a way to look busy, to appear that they're doing something, and then not being able to deal with it.
Has the President responded to the DA's calls for a meeting with the security cluster ministers? And why is this meeting so important?
Yeah, I think it's an important meeting. I've been in KZN, so I'll have to check in with the office whether we've received a response. But that meeting is important because I think that what we've seen right from the get-go in this is a tossing of the hot potato between the State Security Agency, the SAPS, the Police Minister, and others in the security cluster. And I think there's a very easy way to get to the bottom and the heart of where the problem lies, because you can't address the problem if we don't understand where the problem lies originally. So it's very simple. We had a meeting with the opposition leaders. I said very clearly at that meeting to the President that that was not the time for accountability, that we were more interested in making sure that we bring the situation under control, and we tabled a 9-point plan, and thankfully those 9 points were followed, and I think it led to the situation being brought under control again. But now is the time for accountability. And I think we've got to be able to hold those ministers accountable. Was there an orange notice issued by State Security? If so, where did that orange notice go? And what did the police then do with that orange notice? Were they caught unprepared, under-resourced, and under-equipped to be able to deal with that? And I think the easiest way to do it is to bring those two ministers in a meeting and say who knew what, when did they know it, and most importantly, what did they do about it?
Has the South African Human Rights Commission been asked to look into the issue of race baiting in KZN?
Francois, do you want to answer that?
I'm not aware of
that. I'm not aware of the Human Rights Commission being here, but I think they should. I think they should be here. I think that they should absolutely be playing a role, particularly in bedding down the race-based narratives, the scapegoating, the use of minorities, and the generalization and stereotyping. I think they should be brought in. I think that they have a role to play in bringing communities together, making sure that human rights are upheld here in South Africa, and that we don't descend into a full-blown race war in South Africa, fanned on by politicians who themselves are doing it for narrow political purposes.
The looting has had devastating effects on many businesses, including the agricultural sector. What is the plan to avoid a food crisis?
Well, I think that, as I said right from the beginning of the first plan that we put on the table, is that farming areas and supply lines have to be secured. Part of the reason you had a shortage was the looting of the stores, but then there was an inability to resupply because the N3 had been blocked off and trucks were being burnt at the N3 toll plaza. Now again, this is not the first time that this has happened. Every time there's unrest in KwaZulu-Natal, the N3 at Mooi River becomes a flashpoint. Why on earth was there no resources there then to make sure that we could avoid that, knowing that that would always be the first place for that to take place? And that, I think, begs the question. So we've got to make sure that the arterial routes remain open and uncompromised so that goods and services can flow into KwaZulu-Natal. And we've got to make sure that the agricultural areas are protected. There were a number of, and this is something that's been missed perhaps in the coverage of this, there were a number of agricultural farms, there were a number of areas that were completely burnt and damaged, and obviously that's going to have a longer term impact on food security, so we need to secure those.
John, I'd like to add something to that. You know, if one looks at the 5 days of anarchy and the result and the collapse of business and of the challenges in agriculture and supply chain, again, the DA has led the way, where our shadow minister of agriculture, Annette Steyn, was immediately on the ground and engaging with farmers and trying to come up with solutions and a way forward. I don't recall having seen the local MEC of agriculture anywhere near the problem or trying to address it. So again, it just points to a government that is just missing in action.
Anybody else? So just on that as well, the Annette Steyn, as Francois said, has also asked the Minister of Agriculture for a task team to be formed to look into the issue of food security and food sources here in KwaZulu-Natal. When she was here, as Francois said, she did an extensive tour of the province, engaging with the agricultural industry.
I'm sorry, I came in late, so I don't know whether you answered this question.
Sure.
But as a resident of Phoenix, we have not seen large-scale racial attacks from either side. But the media is hyped it to what it was. And so I never heard DA's voice on that.
Sure.
Because the DA is quite prevalent in Phoenix.
Yeah.
And we made statements to say it's not racial. There may have been some racial people that was kind of taking advantage of the situation. But by and large, the community was protecting itself, and maybe some things have slipped through. But what is the position?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said right at the beginning, that I think what you're seeing, it's not necessarily the media, I think it's politicians that are using this as a way to try and detract attention away from their failings to create law and order and to instill law and order. So there was a vacuum created, and as science tells you, when a vacuum is created, something will always fill that vacuum. And what filled the vacuum of the breakdown of law and order and the fact that the SAPS and the Metro and others lost control of the situation was communities having to step in and take care of themselves, was looting and violence, and yes, elements of vigilantism. But it's not my assessment, and certainly having been on the ground in Nanda, in Tazuma, in Mount Moriah, in Verulam, in Phoenix, and other areas, that there is a race war on the way. I think it is a scapegoating of this community. And I think that Becky clearly and others are using it to try and cover up for their failings. The majority of citizens of this province are peace-loving citizens who, as I said, want to live a life of value. The state has a role in terms of making sure that those people are protected. So I reject absolutely this notion that there is some sort of race war. The communities in Phoenix and surrounds have lived in perfect harmony for over a decade. And people work, live, and play within these communities on a daily basis. If there was a race war, why is it suddenly after decades of people coexisting peacefully? So what we need to do is to make sure that we don't allow those politicians to fan the flames of that and divide communities when what we should be doing is building bridges and uniting South Africans. No good can come from violence. No good can come from looting, and no good can come from vigilantism. And which is why we've got to have communities working together. But that's not going to happen if you create a group of people who get blamed for everything and the other people who are also responsible get off scot-free. I think that's going to be a terrible situation, and we've got to avoid that. Yes, absolutely.
Right, thank you, John and Francois, and thank you everyone for attending today's media briefing. We are now moving off to the community of Chatsworth. We've got a number of engagements there with community leaders, religious leaders, and organisations in that community, and then we'll be heading to Mlazi for an engagement there as well later in the day. Hopefully you can join us as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Great.